Hi guys, it's Carrie Eink
and Sarah Norris
from the START Institute for SPD. And today we're going to do things a little bit differently on our Facebook Live. Earlier we opened it up to ask you guys questions. Any questions that you had regarding adult sensory processing disorder. And thank you to those who responded. You guys threw out some awesome questions. So we're just going to go through them and answer them.
So our first question comes from Christine, and she's asking, are the symptoms different with a child and an adult? So the answer to that is not a straight yes or no. I think it's a yes and no.
Yeah, so the subtypes are the same throughout the lifespan. So, you know, if you have overresponsivity as a child, or a child who has overresponsivity and an adult who have overresponsivity, kind of the mechanism is the same. As you grow throughout the lifespan, what we've seen is that the patterns can change and develop as the nervous system develops. So if you have overresponsivity as a child, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to exhibit the same exact overresponsivity as an adult or even a teenager.
And so thinking kind of broadly, that sensations and sensation processing has a lot to do with your environment and what's going on around you. So clearly the occupations and the activities that children do are much different than what adults do. So you're not going to see the same exact problems and symptoms pop up, but you can definitely see those patterns. So a lot of times if someone has challenges processing a specific type of sensation, let's say touch, they're going to have problems with that same sense throughout their lifespan, but it might shift because as kids, you know, they might have a hard time tolerating grooming, like if somebody is brushing their hair, brushing their teeth, but as they get older, you know, they're doing it themselves, and they might just be really particular about other things, or they may not groom as oftenly as they should, or something like that, but it just looks different from problem to problem.
Yeah, and one pattern that we've seen throughout the lifespan is that as you get into teenage years and adulthood, a lot of the individuals we treat have developed a lot of cognitive strategies by those years. So what we mean by that is a lot of times they've developed a lot of these strategies in their head that tell them, you know, when I feel this, I'm going to block it out. I'm going to just drink water. I'm going to do something to distract myself. Or maybe they've developed something to help cope with it. And so there tends to be a lot more going on just because the cognition is developing through the years. And in order to get through the day, typically individuals develop a lot of strategies to handle it. So it can look a lot different. Even if the symptom mechanism is the same, the individual might look much different handling it.
And I think the other piece that goes into that is kind of social awareness. So as an infant and a young child, it's more likely that you're going to see like external behaviors of throwing tantrums and having a fit and meltdowns and more of those reactionary responses to sensations. And as individuals get older and they learn that they get in trouble for doing that, or it's frowned upon, or that other people don't respond well to those responses, they tend to become more of those silent sufferers. They internalize. They tend to try and hide it. So it's definitely one of those things that from the outside looking in on an individual with SPD, you might say, oh yeah, he's gotten better. His symptoms have resolved. And it's not that they're gone, they're just hidden. And I think that can be really, really hard, both as an individual who's trying to figure out how to take care of their sensory needs, as well as someone who's around that individual trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know we've talked in previous videos, but thinking about the mental health components that also tend to come up and kind of shift how you might be coping with some of these symptoms as well. So things like depression, anxiety, and some of those mental health issues can also change how it might look.
One other pattern that I've seen with sensory processing disorder over the lifespan is how differently the discrimination subtype can look like. So that's the being able to understand what a sensation is and what particular details about it you like and don't like, and what might be better and what might be worse. So being able to fine-tune sensations and even figure out how to fix things that are wrong. I think as children it's very common to see really active behavior. So a lot of intense movement, jumping, crashing, spinning, flipping, doing a lot of what some people might think is sensory craving behavior at times or sensory seeking. But what those children are doing are trying to get more and more information to either regulate themselves or to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think there could be that social component as well. They realize I can no longer, if I'm at work, I can no longer jump and crash and roll around, and so I either withdraw, or we see a lot of different strategies coming up. But yes, we're seeing still those discrimination challenges may be there, but it doesn't have those same craving-like behaviors.
And I think with as individuals get older, there are more expectations for interactions, whereas you might forgive a kid for being crazy, you're going to ask a lot more questions of a teen or an adult who's out of control. And I think what's hard with discrimination is those individuals really struggle with knowing why they're acting the way they are and what they're doing and how it's helping, or even if it is helping. So there's just a lot of confusion surrounding that particular subtype. And it can be really difficult, again, to figure it out. But the way we see a lot of adults and teens coping with it is, again, more of that internalization, more of that shutdown, more of that I'm just going to withdraw because I don't know what to do with all of this information, and I'm going to retreat and escape into something I do understand. So maybe it's reading, maybe it's art, maybe it's some other form of activity that brings them that sense of knowing, and there is like a clear right and wrong. So another really common one is academics. Some of them really throw themselves in that because they know what the right answer is and it feels really good. Video games is another one that they throw themselves into a lot because they can be successful and they can get to the next level.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so the next question from Mary. I have cabin fever. I think it has to do with lack of physical exercise outside. What can I do inside to help? I love to work outside when it's warmer.
So Carrie and I actually talked about this a little bit before we got on camera because it's a pretty wide question, and not knowing what your particular profile is, like Mary Beth, we don't know exactly how to answer it for you, but we thought maybe we can help you through the thought process we would help you through. And so thinking about what it is about being outside, what is it that's supportive for your sensory systems? And maybe it is the movement, maybe that's a big piece of it, but there could be other aspects too.
Yeah, I think one of the more common sensory components that not a lot of us think about right away when we think about SPD is the visual input that you get in different environments. So thinking about being inside in a building, especially in fluorescent lighting, versus being outside in natural lighting, versus being in a dimly lit room with all lamps. That tends to be a big surprise to a lot of the individuals I work with, just how much visual input, especially the lighting, the sunny days versus gloomy days, fluorescence versus lamp lighting, and that can really be more of an impacting factor than a lot of people think about.
And another aspect that kind of combines the movement and the vision together is that spatial awareness. So when you're inside, there's typically a pretty designated space, and usually it's smaller than when you're outside. And so visually, you have a shorter visual field, and so you don't have that expansiveness that outside can provide you, which also makes you feel more trapped because, yeah, I don't see the opportunity to move because I'm in a confined space. So thinking about, like, if that's something that appeals to you about being outside is that kind of openness, definitely finding a window is going to be a really good thing, especially if you can see far away and get some natural lighting through that window. But then there's other aspects of being outside too, the smells. So maybe there's smells about being outside, like the crisp, clean air can be really helpful. So you can't exactly recreate that inside very easily, but maybe you can crack a window for a while to get some fresh air. Maybe you can diffuse some smells that are reminiscent of being outside that could help you feel like you're more in tune with the earth or whatever it is that really connects you when you're outside.
Yeah, and then I think one of the more familiar differences is that we hear from all across the lifespan is the movement that we can get outside versus being inside. Being outside just allows for a lot more movement opportunities often, and it sounds like you're working outside, so maybe you're in the garden, maybe you live on a farm or a ranch, so that just provides a lot more of that heavy work, a lot more vestibular information going through space. So thinking about how can I get heavy work and movement inside, or maybe it's at a gym. Oftentimes gyms can be hard just because there's a lot of multisensory information going on in gyms. So even thinking about, pushing and pulling, rearranging furniture. The obvious ones are things like mini trampolines and swings, but a lot of times we might not have access to that. So thinking about pushing and pulling, carrying heavy objects, some of those more basic ones that you might have heard about, but even thinking about, maybe doing some jumps, some jumping jacks in the house. I know that's been helpful for some of my clients.
And I think the quality of the movement that you get outside, so what you tend to do outside is, are you a runner, a jogger, like you like to go, go, or are you more of like sit in the nature and read a book kind of outside person? So thinking about the kind of activity you're drawn to outside and thinking about, is it moving my head through space? That feels really good. Like I love to go do cartwheels outside. Then getting maybe an aerial yoga swing and figuring out how to use that could be really helpful. But maybe it's more of like, I like that compression in my joints when I'm running, and I like the rhythm and the pattern and the input. So doing more of the heavy lifting, furniture moving, deep cleaning, jumping jacks, things like that can be really helpful if that's what you're after.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the Sense group that we did last year. We kind of helped the individuals in the group break down some of the activities that they enjoy by the sensory properties. And I think that was such a huge activity for them to do, just to understand it's not necessarily thinking about how to do that exact activity in another environment, but how do I take those sensory aspects and put it into a different activity in a different environment.
Yeah, and so I think one of the helpful things is either you have someone you work with that can help you think through it in this way, or we do, when we release the webinar in just a few weeks, there's going to be actually a couple of different webinars that help you do that with different activities. So that's going to be something to be looking out for if you want to go through that process for yourself.
Yeah, we tried to break it down into kind of a step-by-step process that might start getting you in that mind frame. So not just figuring that out for just that webinar, but how can you start getting in that mind frame, because that's a lot of times what OTs are doing in the adolescent and adult populations.
Yeah. All right, so our last question is from Wendy, and this one's a big one. She's asking about mothering and SPD and how to cope with nursing and being attached to young, small, sticky children and having those incessant crying sessions when you have auditory sensitivity. So how do you cope with all that? And so this is something that, again, not knowing the specific preferences and triggers and challenges, it's hard to give you a straight answer, but I can definitely give you from my own experience of going through that early childhood phase with my own children and just thinking about it from the sensory side of things. I think the first thing that you need to keep in mind is, especially if you're nursing, is that you feel like you are on 24/7 duty and you feel like you cannot be inaccessible to your child because you are their source of nutrition and their source of comfort and you are their primary caregiver. And so finding ways to detach and get space for yourself can feel selfish, you can feel wrong, and you can have a lot of guilt around that. But it's absolutely important, if you have sensory processing challenges of any kind, to carve out that space and time for yourself. So maybe you do need to figure out a way to get some reprieve. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but especially talking to the people that also care for you and your child, and trying to problem solve with them of how you can get a break, and a decent break, not just like a 15-minute you hold the baby while I eat kind of break. It's more like, no, you need time to do something for yourself, and figuring out what it is that recharges you and makes you feel human again, so that you can return to your infant and you can be that supportive person you desperately want to be, but struggle to be because you're overwhelmed. And so it can be something that it's hard to tease out with the postpartum depression, because they have some pretty similar symptoms, and thinking about how big of a change it is to go from whatever your life was before a baby to life after a baby. It's dramatic, and it is going to take you some time to get used to, and it's okay to be really uncomfortable with that transition. I think that it's not something that's expected by anyone. Like, having a baby is a joyful experience. And so it can be really shocking when you have this baby that you've been wanting and that you love with so much power that you didn't even imagine you could have. And yet, it's hard. And so finding people you can talk to and collaborate with, finding a mommy support group, whether it's online or in your community, can be extremely helpful. But then also taking that time of figuring out what are the sensory challenges with this particular interaction. Is it the noise? Is it the touch? Is it whatever?
Yeah, even the praxis, thinking about all the new routines that come with having another life in the house, the bottles, the nursing, all of that is a new praxis component, a new routine. So even having people help you out with that, maybe your own meals, getting those prepared ahead of time, any of that preparation that you can have others help with or maybe do ahead of time, we know is always helpful with praxis, but especially with all the high arousal and all the changes and the lack of sleep that also affects our nervous system, doing things, and I think that support system is really such a big thing in this phase of life, and asking for help with some of these areas. So having the breaks, but also some of that praxis, so also some of that planning, organization, even having them help execute meal times for other people in your household. I think that's such a valuable thing to think about.
And I think this can be a little bit embarrassing to talk about, because I don't want to say that any of you are not capable of caring for your child. That's not what I'm insinuating at all. But having been in the trenches myself and knowing how isolating and overwhelming it can be to be the only one at home with your child for the whole day or for multiple days in a row, it's beyond exhausting. And it's super important to know that when you feel like you're losing control, there is at least one person who can be there really quickly to help. And it's just, I never ever realized how people, or I couldn't wrap my head around how people would shake their babies, okay? And it's one of those things that once I had my own child and I was in that situation where I was isolated and I was alone and there was nobody there for me, I got it. I understood why people shake their babies. And it's such a scary realization to come to. And so if you have had that, if you feel that, you're not alone. It's human nature to lose your cool when you've been under stress like that. So finding a way to safely separate yourself from your baby. And yes, your baby needs you, but your baby needs to be safe. So separating yourself from your baby, reaching out to someone, again, whether they can physically be there for you, virtually over the phone, but having someone who can help you calm yourself down, help you realize what happened and it's okay, it happens to everyone, getting re-regulated so you can take care of your child again. It's hard to admit, but it happens.
Yeah, so lots of big, important issues once we start getting into this teenage, adulthood transition. So again, we started to tackle some of these with the Sense group that we did last year. We videoed it and made it into a webinar. We really are hoping to reach out to all of you that have more questions, that might feel confused, feel kind of that isolated feeling. So I think it's coming out in about a couple weeks, end of the month. It's going to go live on SPD University, which is our online platform for education. It's on our website. So that's, it's a beginning step. Some of these issues are really specific, and I love that you guys are reaching out and asking these questions and giving us the areas that we should be focusing on. We definitely want to do more of this education in the future, so keep telling us what your questions are, telling us the areas that are important to you. I think these are such important discussions, and yeah, they can be heavy and they can be kind of hard to have, so we're happy to be here facilitating the conversation to get the discussion going. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.